Hey everyone, it is me again, and tonight I want to talk about something really personal, my journey with real estate. When I bought my first house at 24 years old, I genuinely thought that real estate was going to be a huge part of my wealth building strategy because I was seeing tons of videos talking about how you can own multiple rental properties and get cash flow from all these. You are going to build equity, you can use the cash flow from the rental properties to continue to buy more, and it just snowballs on itself. It sounded like a dream, honestly, but after owning my house for a couple of years now, I completely have changed my mind on real estate as a whole. And I honestly feel like just social media makes owning real estate look way simpler and way more profitable than it actually is in real life. It is not always the fairy tale they paint. So I am going to be telling you guys my entire home buying journey, what it has been like for me, why I bought the house, basically the cost, the rate, the timeline, all that stuff. I am going to be telling you guys about some hidden costs as well. I have even turned the property into a rental property now. And then finally, I will talk about my investing strategy and would I do it again. So before we jump into the video, go ahead and drop a comment down below. What are your thoughts on real estate? Are you interested in it? Do you think you are going to own a bunch of rentals, or do you just want to have one house, maybe like just your family home, or do you want to just avoid real estate altogether? Go ahead and comment that down below. I am curious what people say. Also, one thing I did want to mention is please do not interpret anything I am saying in this video as me bragging or flexing, because part of the reason I was able to get in this position was because I was very frugal. I saved a lot of my money, but also because a little bit of it was just luck and timing. I will admit that I am not going to sit here and act like I was some total genius that knew how to navigate the real estate market like a beast. This was my first house. I did get very lucky in the position that I got into. So just please be aware of that. I am not trying to brag or flex at all because that stuff is cringy, but I did want to at least share my journey with real estate. All right, so jumping into the first section here, why I bought the house in the first place. So for me, I initially thought that I was going to build my wealth with 50% real estate and 50% the stock market. So if I had $1 million net worth, I thought $500,000 of that net worth would come from real estate and the other 500,000 would come from stocks. And so because of this, one of my goals was to try to buy my first house before I turned 25 years old, and I wanted to make sure that I did it all on my own. Nobody was helping me. I didn't go halves with a girlfriend I was dating at the time. I didn't have a wife helping out. My parents did not help me out. I wanted this to be all on me. I wanted to go through the process all by myself. That way I could look back and say that I did this on my own. That was really important for me in a little 30-second rant here. It is actually a huge pet peeve of mine when somebody gets help from their family for buying a house and then they pretend like they did it all on their own. It is like, no, your parents gave you $50,000 for a down payment. In fact, you did not really do anything. Your parents just gave you all the money and now the house is in your name, which that is totally fine if your parents help you out. But at least own that. Don T, pretend like you did it yourself. That is my main thing. Alrighty, off my soapbox, I apologize there. But what I was initially saying was I was planning on having half my wealth from stocks and half my wealth from real estate. So that was a goal of mine. And I was able to buy my house basically February of 2020. 3 is when I closed on the house. I put the earnest money deposit down November of 2022. And I'm going to go into the actual math and some of the numbers of my house. So initially when I was looking to buy a home, I was approved for a $300,000 loan. And the interest rate that I had at the time, this is around November of 2022. Like early November, late October, I was approved for a 7% interest rate. Now, you have to remember in 2022, the Fed was pumping rates up. So at the time, interest rates were pretty high. I had an 800 credit score, I had no student loans, no debt at all, and I was still getting 7% as my interest rate, which is pretty rough. And before I bought my house, I was initially just going to go through a very traditional route. I was going to go through a lender, I was going to go through a realtor, and I was like, okay, this is how I am going to do this because this is how most people do it. And so I toured a couple of townhouses with the realtor, and honestly, they were kind of ran down. Like there were some that were okay, but like they still would have needed a little bit of fixing up, like probably $10,000 to $15,000 in renovations. And even then, I was really too excited about that because I wanted to own an actual like family house, like a residential home. I didn't want to own a townhouse because with condos and townhouses, there is HOS just like a residential house, but typically they tend to be higher. That is not always the case, but at least the area I was looking in, the HOAs were a lot higher. They would be a couple hundred a month. So what I ended up actually doing was I ended up going through a builder. Now, if you do not know what that is, these are really large companies. These are companies like Dr. Horton, Lennar. There is another company called Pulte Group or NVR, KB Home. There is a bunch of companies like this. And basically how a builder works is they buy a bunch of land in an area. They build up a bunch of houses in that area, and they are basically doing it in bulk. The same way that Costco can sell you something where you buy it in bulk, but then they are selling the per unit item at a cheaper price. That is what builders can essentially do. That is how it was explained to me when I was buying the house. And so the reason that I went through the builder at the time was because I got offered a way lower rate. They were going to cover closing cost, and they covered an additional $3,000 on top of that. And so the purchase price that I ended up buying this house for, It is a 3-bed, 2-bath house. It is about 1,500 square feet, is $260,000. It is a 30-year loan, and the interest rate on that is 4.875%. So you can already see that I am very intrigued by this deal because I went from a 7% interest rate to 4.8%. So I am saving a lot of money in interest there. But one thing that was kind of interesting when we looked at the math and I sat down with like the representative of the builder, basically, we looked at different down payment options. We looked at 5%, 10%, 15, 20 FHA, like 3.5%, what all of that looked like. And what was interesting was that if I put 10% down with a little bit of fees and some small stuff, it was going to be $27,000 total. And the math on that actually made more sense than me putting 20% down, because had I put 20% down, I would have had to put $54,000 in, but the monthly payment would have only dropped like $200 less. So if you do 27,000 divided by 200, it is basically an 11-year timeline for that math to actually make sense. And I knew this was not going to be my forever home. I was definitely not going to live in it for 11 years. I knew I would convert it to a rental property eventually. I just did not know exactly when, but I knew probably within like 2 to 5 years I would. So that is the deal I ended up going with. I ended up putting $27,000. That was the down payment as well as closing costs, anything like that. And again, they covered the closing cost, but any like little fees and stuff like that. So it was 10% plus another like $1,000 of, small things here and there. It is a 30-year loan, 4.875% interest. I did have PMI initially that has since dropped off, which is pretty nice because the value of the home has gone up. So that is basically the math behind the house. Okay, so I ended up putting the earnest money deposit down, which was like $3,000. I initially put that down November of 2022. All that does is that is basically the builder-esque way of saying, okay, he officially owns this house. So once the house is fully built, he can move into it. It is basically like putting some money down. That way it becomes yours, and like they are putting it on hold for you. Then the home was finally done being built February of 2023. I moved in shortly after, and that is basically where I started there. So I lived in the house from February of 2023 until May of 2024. And one of the main things I learned while living in the house, so I went from an apartment which was like not that expensive at all to a house, which I knew the monthly payment would be more expensive, but holy wow. There are some hidden costs that people do not tell you about starting out with the first thing, because I had a lawn and not a big one. This is imagine like a new town, like neighborhood, like it genuinely looked like one of those houses. Okay, so it is not a huge house. Every house is very cookie cutter. It worked fine. The yard was not that big, but oh my God. My water bill was so much money those first 2 months because at my apartment, my water bill was like $40 a month. On average, every month at the house, it was around $125. But the first 2 months, it was $250+. And the reason for this is because when I was initially touring the house and they were showing me, hey, this is how the water system works, they had it watering 3 times a week, 3 times a day. So it basically watered 9 times a week. Okay. And that stuff cost so much money, I was pissed. So I ended up completely changing it. I would only water the grass basically like twice a week, one time for like 6 minutes or something like that. Like I had to reduce it a bunch in order to get the water bill down. But that was the first thing that bit me in the rear, was how expensive your utilities can be just from small things like sprinklers and, watering the grass. Like, geez, now in regards to the electricity, this actually did not change very much, which kind of surprised me. I thought it would be a lot more expensive, but it really was not that bad. It was pretty normal. I think it was like somewhere between like, I don't know, $80 to $90 a month, which was not too bad because my electricity at the apartment I think was like 60 or 70. And of course the house was a lot larger than the previous apartment I was living in. I mean, the apartment before I was living in, I guess would probably be around 700 square feet. This apartment was again 1,500. So about double the size there. But on top of the water bill being a lot higher, you have the HOAs, which seems like it is pretty hard to get away from those these days. But mine was not too bad. Mine is about $700 a year that I pay once a year. But that is another expense you have to take into account. And then also on top of that, there is lawn care. So either you are going to have to pay somebody to mow your lawn, or you are going to have to, buy a lawnmower and do it yourself. And then I also had to pay for pest control because the house was like kind of near a lake. And so we get a ton of bugs, which was just a pain in the rear. So I would have pest control come out quarterly. That is an extra $120 a quarter. And then on top of all this, your monthly payment for the house can go up every year depending on what state you are living in, because some states increase their property taxes. So for example, if your home is, let's say, $300,000, let's say the next year it goes up quite a bit and it is now worth $350,000. In certain states, they are going to then charge you more in property taxes because your home value went up. So, your home value went up, which is great, but then now your monthly payment goes up. And so that is another thing that you do have to factor in, which should definitely affect your tolerance for how much money you are willing to pay each month. And the thing I have always heard with real estate when you are comparing renting versus owning a home is that the amount you are paying for rent, that is the maximum amount. I mean, you got your rent. Okay. But with your mortgage, that is the minimum amount. I did not realize what that meant until I bought my first house. And I definitely learned from all these things I just listed off to you. And so you always hear people talk about how there is more cost with real estate, but that that definitely came to fruition once I owned my house and saw it for myself, and I am glad I at least learned that lesson pretty quickly and was able to adjust a little bit. So, like I said before, I lived in that house for about a year and 3 months, a year and 4 months around there, and then I turned it into a rental. So, what that process looked like was the very first thing I did was find a property manager. I literally just Googled property managers near me, and I started calling people, and I found a guy that was great. He ended up coming to the house. I showed him around the place. He said, "Okay, perfect. When are you planning on moving out?" "Okay, you are planning on moving out this date. I am going to have people start to tour immediately after. Make sure you have cleaners come in. They will fully clean the house once you are moved out. And then I will put the key in a lockbox, and then that way I can give people tours." So I was like, okay, great. So how the property manager works for me is basically he takes 10% of the gross rent. So if the rent for the tenants is $2,000, he is going to take $200, and then I get the remaining $1,800. That is just as simple as the math goes there. So I move out of the house May of 2024. I only had 1 month of overlap, which was actually not bad at all. And what I mean by this was there was only 1 month where I had to pay my mortgage and pay rent at the new apartment I was living in. So I was able to get a tenant in by June of 2024, which was great. So literally just a month later, I already had somebody living there. And another question some people might have is, oh, well, why did you decide to move out and rent the house? The main reason I decided to move out was because of work. I got a job the previous summer, and I was doing quite a bit of commuting at the time, and I just did not want to make that commute anymore, and I wanted to live closer to my job. So that is the main reason I did that there. So in regards to the cash flow of the property and what that looks like, so year one, I was losing $130 a month. So this is factoring in the property manager taking money off the top, right? Okay, so basically the tenant pays them. He takes his 10% and he pays me the rest. So basically after the property manager would take his 10%, it would cover most of the mortgage, and then I would just pay $130, which really was not that bad. I mean, I was making $85,000 a year, so it is like $65 a paycheck pretty much that was coming out of my pocket. And you have to remember the tenant is paying down the loan too, so that does help. So that was year one. And then year two, I was pretty much break even. We did not increase the rent that much, but basically even after the property manager takes his 10%, then I am exactly break even. This was just coincidence how it worked out there, but that was pretty nice to see. So year two, again, not making any cash flow on it, just basically just cruising on by. I pay the mortgage every month. A couple days later, between the 1st and the 5th, the property manager gives me all that money back. I move it back into a savings account, do the exact same thing the next month, rinse and repeat. Very straightforward. Now, year three, this is actually kind of interesting. I am actually cash flowing a grand $72 a month because we did not increase rents on the tenant. The tenant has been great, and I was actually able to protest the property tax increases. There is companies that can do that for you as well. Also look into that if you are in a state where they do increase property taxes, and so it actually lowered my monthly payment, which is pretty cool. So the tenant is paying the exact same amount as they were last year. But now I am making a little bit of money on the side, which is great. I mean, they are paying down the loan. I am making a little bit of money here and there. It is not a lot of money, but it is definitely cool to be in the green. And I am mainly just saving that off to the side because you do have to pay taxes on this stuff as well, which you have to factor in. So how did all of this change my investing strategy? But one thing I want to be very clear about is I have already made a video kind of talking about why I think real estate is overhyped. So I am not going to sit here and go down a huge tangent. Feel free to check out that video if you want. But one of the main things I would say, everybody I know that is excited about owning real estate are people who do not own real estate yet. People love to sit there and analyze how profitable a house would be, but it is honestly a huge pain in the rear sometimes. It is one of the few investment categories that requires more money along the way. If I put a $100,000 into the SP 500, I will never get a call from the SP saying, hey, you got to put more money in.